All right. For devotions, I will talk about what I'm reading in my devotions. I never do any Google searches to try and figure something out. I just talk about what I'm reading about. And if you want to turn to Genesis 28, in men's Sunday school, I'm teaching men's Sunday school as well, so this kind of all blends together, and it's kind of interesting to read this story. This is a fascinating story about Jacob and Esau. Sometimes when I read this story, I wonder, did Esau just get the wrong flip of the coin? And why does it say in Romans 9 that Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated? Why is it that, all of these things happen, and God had a plan, and he even mentioned in Romans 9, through Isaac my offspring will be reckoned. And what does it all mean? And how does this all make sense? And how does, these were just people making decisions back then, and is the God that they were serving the same God that we serve today? I believe that is the truth. They are serving the same God. But all the decisions that they were making and all of the plan for God's people was unfolding in front of their very eyes, and they didn't know it. But the story of Jacob and Esau is fascinating, and how it unfolds, and how it just unfolds. So if you want to turn to Genesis 28, I'll kind of do a bit of a backstory here. As you know, and if you didn't know already, Jacob did steal the birthright and blessing from Esau. It's kind of like getting dinged twice with photo radar. I got a photo radar this week. So it's like almost Jacob dinged him twice. He got him once and then he got him one more time just to shove the knife a little further in. He steals his blessing, and if you read, in Genesis 27, Isaac answered him, it says, you read about his blessing that Esau gets, right? And it says this, Genesis 27, verse 39, your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. And it's just, and if you read even earlier on in Genesis 28, and you read the blessing that Jacob gets, and even though it was done in deception, it was just such a horrible blessing. Like, you compare the two, and it's like one gets the first fruits and the other one gets what's left over. And it's like one gets, the first round pick, and one gets the fifth. And one gets the prime real estate, and the other one gets just the sloppy seconds. And it just seems like Esau got, worked over. He got the raw end of the deal, and he didn't get what was best, right? He then decided, well, how can I get my blessing from my father? What can I do? I've been deceived twice. I've been dinged twice with the photo radar. What can I do? How can I go and try and reconcile this? How can I maybe get a blessing at all? So what does he do? He marries, I'm going to call him an uncle, Ishmael's daughter, Mahalath, because Rebekah didn't want anybody to marry someone from the Hittite women. So I've never really thought about marrying my uncle's daughter. I don't know if that's a really good idea, but that's what he did. Abraham, if you know, conceived with Hagar, had Ishmael, and then down from there he had Mahalath, and Mahalath married Esau. So that was kind of his, all right, I'm going to try and get your blessing. Every son wants a blessing from his father, no doubt. Whether you're first, second, or third born, you always want your blessing. You always want his consent. So he was trying to get his consent. He was trying to get his approval. But to no avail, he just burned with anger because of what Jacob did to him. So Jacob fled. Rebekah concocted a scheme, go flee to my brothers. And he flees to Laban. And on the way, he goes to Padan Aram. And he had a dream, and this dream is quite fascinating. Anyways, so Padan Aram, if you don't know where that is, I didn't know where it was. If all of the rest of you know where it is, which I doubt some of you do, Padan Aram is in Iraq. They say, I looked it up a little bit. They called it in Mesopotamia. They suspect that it's between the Tigris and the Euphrates. And so that's kind of where he was going, if you want to call it that. I always like to look up where these stories are going on so I can look at a map and visualize, and it helps me understand. It helps me realize, did this story actually take place? Where are these cities? Where are these towns? So anyways, he was going on the way to Padan Aram. He wasn't quite there yet. And in Genesis 28, verse 10, it says this. I'll even read a little earlier. I'll read 28, verse 6. Now Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Padan Aram to take a wife from there. And that when he blessed him, he commanded him, do not marry a Canaanite woman, and that Jacob obeyed his father and mother. Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite woman were to his father Isaac, so he went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, the sister of Nebaioth, and daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to the wives he already had. But Jacob, on the way to Padan Aram, he has a dream. He's going somewhere foreign. He's scared. He doesn't know what's going on. I don't have dreams, but Jacob had a dream. And what a dream it was. 28 verse 10 says this. Jacob left Beersheba, and he set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. So a fascinating dream. He has a dream about the stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. And there stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place. So he was off on this foreign excursion, not knowing if God was with him, not knowing what was going on. And what does he do? He said he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. He's not quite in Padan Aram yet, but he's getting close. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and the stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. And I read this, and it's just a fascinating, call it a vow, call it a promise, call it testing the waters, call it throwing a line in the water and seeing what's out there. And that's kind of what he's doing here. And I often think to myself when I read this, do we do these same things? Do we go out on foreign excursions, or do we go out to places we've never been before? Does God ask us to do things we've never done? Does God reach out to us and say, I want you to do something that you're not going to like? And then we find evidence of him in our life. Do we make deals with God? Do we ask him, if you'll give me food to eat and clothes to wear, I will return safely to my father's house, and the Lord will be my God. It reveals the humanity in the whole situation. I was scared. I was out in a place I've never been. And then I had a dream, and God showed me that he was here. God showed me that he was evident. God showed me that this wasn't something for fluke. It wasn't some kind of concocted plan or chance happening that he was going out to this place. There was a dream that he had. And then he woke up and he was afraid, and he didn't realize, it seems to me, the gravity of the situation. And then he made a deal. How often do we make a deal? How often do we reach out to God and say, all right, I'll stick my neck out for you, but what are you going to give me back? What are you going to offer me? How much faith do we have? How much do we need to make this work? Do we need evidence? Do we need money? What do we need for God to work in our life? This is what Jacob needed. If God will be with me and watch over me on this journey I'm taking and give me food to eat, clothes to wear, oh boy, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. You know, it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, maybe Jacob didn't have any faith. Maybe he just... But often, how often do we need evidence of God working in our lives before we'll do anything? Before we stick our neck out and say, all right, God, what have you got for me? You give me something to eat, you give me put some clothes on my back, then I'll go. Then I'll give you a tenth. Now we're talking. Now we've got a deal. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know if God was with him. He didn't know what he was doing, if it was right. He stole the birthright from his brother, and out of anger, Esau wanted to kill him. Genesis 27, verse 41 says, then I will kill my brother Jacob. He was running for his life. He didn't know what was going on. Rebekah just told him to leave. He was scared. He was afraid. He didn't know what was going on, but God was with him the whole time. It seemed like the thing to do at the time. When someone threatens your life, you either confront them or you run. And he ran. And he ran away. You got to ask yourself, was it something that was planned by God all along? Or was it just a matter of circumstance? It's all woven together in a story. It's all mingled together right in front of us. And you have to ask the same thing about our own lives. Does God have a plan for us? Is he working in our lives? Is there evidence? I don't think we need to have a dream. But you have to ask yourself, a story that happened so long ago, and to reference Star Wars in a galaxy so far, far away, where or what was going on? But Jacob sits down, sleeping on a rock, which I've never tried. He put it under his head and lay down to sleep and had a dream, and God was with him. And then he said, all right, you're with me? Let's make something work here. And they reference this pillar, this vow, this promise, this place later on. There's, if you read in Genesis 31 and Judges, it talks about this later on. Remember that place where you made a vow with me. And I often wonder, I can look back in my own life where God showed evidence to me that he was there when I didn't have anything left. And I often wonder if Jacob, when later on in life, he looked back to this place where he erected a pillar that will be God's house, and you will give me a tenth. It was that time when he was vulnerable, when he was alone, when he didn't know what to do, when he had this dream and he didn't understand it. But he knew that God was with him, and he erected this pillar. And I often wonder, I look in our own lives and I ask you, What pillars have you erected? What have you done, and how is God working through you? And do you have to make a deal with him? It is a fascinating story. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. What does it mean? What does it mean that through Isaac your offspring will be reckoned? These were just individuals making choices. Sometimes it was wrong. Sometimes it was right. We have the luxury of foreknowledge to see. But throughout it, God was working. He was working. He was with Jacob. How could God be with Jacob if he stole his blessing and his birthright? Oh, the humanity of it all. Thank you for your time. You are dismissed for Sunday school.
I was taking the last hour here this time to get through my notes, and it's always a challenge, if you will. It's me overcoming nerves to come up here, and you always think that you don't quite have your message down or your sermon, and so you go over it quickly at the last minute, and then you make all kinds of crazy notes like I do, but maybe you don't. Maybe you have it all together. I love architecture. I love building. I'm a builder at heart. Whether it's any kind of building, whether it's building with my hands or building with my mind or building a business or building Lego or anything like that. I just love building. This morning, we're going to talk about the cornerstone, who is Jesus, and some of the things that the Bible says about building with us, the living stones. The Jews had a legend based on a statement in Psalm 118:22. Psalm 118:22 says, "The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner." According to that legend, and this was in the Jewish Wikipedia, I don't know what it's called exactly. When the Temple of Solomon was being built, the masons sent up from the quarry below a stone different in size and shape from all the rest that had been sent up. Looking at it, the builders said, "There is no place for this stone. There must be some mistake." So they rolled it down the edge of the cliff into the kingdom of Kidron, below the temple area. And as time went on, for the temple was 7 years in the building, they were ready for the chief cornerstone. When they asked for it, they were told, "We sent it up to you long time ago." One of the workmen said, "I recall it now. There was a stone altogether different from the rest. And we thought there was no place for it, so we rolled it into the valley below." Men were sent down to the valley to find the stone, and they succeeded in doing so. And when the stone was brought up, it fitted perfectly into its place, the headstone of the corner. Now, if any of you have ever done any research in masonry or stonework, the cornerstone is actually the first stone to be set. And so therefore, right off the bat, this legend makes absolutely no sense. The cornerstone is not the last stone to be put into place. Therefore, in Psalm 118:24, where it says, "The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner." It's interesting when you think about it, and when you actually kind of study how the Jewish people today view that verse, because they don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. That's one of there's a couple other explanations as well, but this is one of them, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So it makes much more sense in saying that Jesus was the stone that the psalmist was talking about. Open your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 2, and we're going to go through verses 4 through 10, I believe. We'll start at 4. So 1 Peter chapter 2, 4 to 10. Well, 4 to 8. And then I think, if I remember right, my conclusion goes into 10. Verse 4. "To whom coming, as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious, ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. Wherefore also it is contained in the scripture," and he's quoting from Isaiah 28:16, "Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling, and a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. We'll start in verse 4. To whom coming as unto a living stone. When we come to Jesus, or let me back up here. We need to come to Jesus. We can live in this world without Jesus, but you'll never be part of the church. You'll never be part of God's will. You'll never be part of the greater plan. So we come to him as a living stone. Peter sets out a picture here that God is building a spiritual temple. And I wanted to bring some bricks this morning, but I didn't have time to go find them. I have a few pallets of bricks laying somewhere in the weeds. I don't know where they are, but Peter's picture here is that he's building a spiritual temple, a spiritual house, if you will. And we are the living stones. You and I, those who have come to the ultimate living stone, who is Jesus. This spiritual house shows that as much as Israel had a temple, Christians also have one as well. But the Christian's temple is spiritual, and they themselves are the temple. You have to remember, the temple is an amazing, I can't think of the right word, but the Jewish religion puts a lot of stock in the building, in the temple. It's a holy place, sacred place. That's where the sacrifices are made. And before Christ's time, the center point of the Jewish religion was the temple. So that's why Peter uses a spiritual temple as a picture story here. That we are the stones that make up the temple. Jesus is first called the living stone, then we are called the living stones. So Jesus first, then us. We live because we are connected with him who is the source of life. Adam Clarke said, "It is in union with him, Jesus, that they live and answer the end of their regeneration. As stones of a building who are of no use, but as they occupy their proper places in a building and they rest upon the foundation." So, these stones that I have sitting on a pallet at home, they're pretty well useless, although they work well for holding things down in the wind in southern Alberta. But other than that, they are useless until the day comes when we decide to use them to actually build something. Then they have a purpose, and they become part of a greater project. Jesus is precious. Peter is trying to point out to us that this cornerstone, Jesus, he is precious. As much as Israel was chosen by God, so is the church. As much as they had a priesthood, so you and I, as Christians, are a holy priesthood. And as much as they have sacrifices, so we as Christians offer up sacrifices that are acceptable to God. First, a holy priesthood. You and I are our own priest before God. In the latter religion, you had to go to the priest. He had to do the sacrificing for you. With the new covenant, with Jesus, you and I can do that ourselves. We offer our own sacrifices to God, or to Jesus. We do not need the high priest. Our relationship is one-on-one with him. This is a quote from Wayne Grudem. There can no longer be an elite priesthood which claims of special access to God or special privileges in worship or in fellowship with God. It goes against what the New Testament says. Peter's idea isn't that God has abandoned Israel or that they have no place in his redemptive plan, but that Christianity is in no way inferior to the old religion. How do we sacrifice? Because we do not need a high priest anymore, then we can offer our own sacrifices. Do we sacrifice doves at home? Sacrifice the calf at home on the farm? No. We offer up spiritual sacrifices, acceptable to God through Jesus. God does the work of the building. God does the building. He places the bricks. We're the bricks. But we do the job of offering the sacrifices that are pleasing to him. So as we come to Jesus, we come to him as we are, as living stones, and then we begin our journey, or our will, we come into God's will, and then we begin our journey, our sacrifice. When we build a building, a good example would be, I'm having a hard time explaining this. A good example would be bricks. We're all bricks. So God's going to put us on the wall, right? He's laid the cornerstone already. When you lay the cornerstone, then you start building the walls after that. Each one of us is a brick. He starts putting the brick in. Our sacrifice as a brick is our job in holding up the building. It's easy to think that when you build a building and the building is done, the bricks are useless now. But they're not. They have compressive strength. For the life of the building, they're always under a load. They're holding up the building. A lot of times you think, well, it's just done. You're done. It's done. They have no use anymore. But that's not true. In the engineering, if you will, of a brick has a compressive strength. And that compressive strength is somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds, depending on the brick. And I quick did the calculations. One brick, if you were to stack weight on it, can hold up to 39,000 pounds of weight before it fails. 39,000 pounds of weight. That's a pile. That's 3 elephants. I looked that up as well. So 3 elephants can stand on one brick before the structure of the brick fails. So when Peter is talking about us sacrificing as living stones of the greater building, we don't just become part of the building and then we become this stagnant, dead brick. We constantly have a compressive force on us, and we're constantly doing a job of holding up the rest of the building. I hope I explained it better that way. Oh, man. I'm going to get that. When we walk with the Lord, we must offer up our own sacrifices. What does that actually mean? What does holding up the building look like? When we come to God, we come into God's will. We give up our own will. We sacrifice our own will to come into God's will. We sacrifice our own pride and we get rid of it. We get rid of our selfishness and we start thinking about others. We start realizing that we're part of a bigger building, and we start realizing that together we are building this amazing project for God. Even a living stone cannot build something great for God on its own. It's just like the bricks that I have on a pallet sitting at home. They're worthless. They're not doing anything. So when we think that we can be our own living stone out on the pallet in the grass, we're not being part of the greater project. We need each other. We need to come together, and we need to build together. God needs us to build. We are a spiritual building. We are a spiritual church. Verse 6, "Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone." Jesus is that cornerstone. If we are being built into a spiritual house, there is no doubt who our chief cornerstone is. You see, the Jewish faith, or the Jewish religion, still to this day goes against all the teachings. And they have lots of reasons to not think that all of this talk of the chief cornerstone is just something else. In the studying that I did, they actually referred back to, there's lots of different passages, which I'll share with you. 1 Kings 5:14 says, "And the king commanded, and they brought great stones, costly stones, and hewed stones to lay the foundation of the house." That was the building of the temple. So they used that as an example. They were actually talking about real stones and real building, not Jesus. In Ezra 3:10 it says, "And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons, with cymbals, to praise the Lord after the ordinance of David, the king of Israel." They think that they were talking about the actual stones. In those verses they were, but in the New Testament verses and what we're talking about today is Jesus. The cornerstone, or the foundation stone, or also known as the setting stone, is the first stone set in the construction. So the legend that I reiterated this in the introduction isn't true because it doesn't make any sense. The cornerstone is the first stone to be laid. Now there are other stones. If you know anything about masonry work, there are other stones. There's not just a cornerstone. There's a capstone. The capstone is the ones that go on top, the last ones. They are put on to protect the structural stones from the weather, from the rain, and also because they look nicer. There's a keystone. The keystone is usually a hand-carved stone or a stone that is built on site because it's the last stone to put in, say, an arch. The keystone is what holds the entire structure together of an arch. Usually they are built by hand, and those are called keystones. And there's many other stones as well, but I didn't dig too far into the masonry terminology. But Jesus is the cornerstone, especially of Psalm 118. "The stone which the builders refused has become the headstone of the corner." Jesus is the headstone of the corner. We know that. In Isaiah 8, "He shall be for a sanctuary." It's interesting how someone can refute some of these ideas. In Isaiah, long before Jesus, it says, "And he shall be for a sanctuary." He. It doesn't say this dead stone that they used to build the temple. Isaiah was talking about a person. He shall be for a sanctuary, the church, but for a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel. He knew that Jesus would be a stumbling block for the Jews and for a gin and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Isn't that interesting? Jesus is the supernatural stone of Daniel chapter 2, and he's also the rock that gave Israel water in the wilderness. 1 Corinthians, it says, "And did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." Verse 7, "Therefore to you who believe, he is precious. Though this chief cornerstone, Jesus, was rejected by the disobedient and the unbelieving, and he still is today, undeniably he is precious." If Jesus isn't precious to you, I highly recommend digging a little deeper. Precious is a very unique word. One way to know if a person has truly a biblical faith is to see if Jesus is precious to them. Sometimes I don't get my sentence structure quite right when I'm making notes, so excuse me. A good example was Charles Spurgeon. When he was 16, he preached his first sermon in the village cottage of a handful of poor people. And he chose for his text 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 7. Unto you therefore which believeth that he is precious. Spurgeon said that he couldn't think of any other verse in the entire Bible to preach about, but that Christ was precious to his soul, and he was in the flush of his youthful love, and he could not be silent when a precious Jesus was the subject at hand. Is Jesus precious to you? Verse 8, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Those who reject the chief cornerstone, refusing to build on him, instead they stumble over it. Instead of being their salvation, Jesus becomes a rock of offense to them. I grew up not in a Christian home, as most of you know, and I can still specifically remember times when Jesus was talked about or pushed onto me, if you will, and it was extremely offensive. I still remember it. It was awkward, it was weird, it was offensive. It's built into us as humans for some reason. I can't explain all that. But when it says that instead you'll stumble over this stone and it will become a rock of offense, it truly means it. People who don't follow Jesus, who are not Christians, it is offensive to them. Jesus set out the course for both Jew and Gentile to be joined together in one glorious house for God. This was part of Peter's explanation. He was talking, this was for the Jews and the Gentiles. They weren't going to build one wall out of Jews and one wall out of Gentiles, or one temple out of Jews and one temple out of Gentiles. It was the same spiritual temple for Jew and Gentile. They stood next to each other in the wall. In the thinking of many Jews at that time, God should have not built a new building. He should have simply renovated the structure of the old Jewish tradition or Jewish religion. And at the time, adding that Jesus was the Messiah and invited the Gentiles to come into the structure. Peter was making it crystal clear that they were on an equal playing field at that time, and today as well. But there were Jews that still had that old viewpoint that, no, we're still the first. We're still the better. Yeah, you can be part of it, but we're still the best. We're still there. There was that attitude, and that's what Peter was preaching against. Therefore, it now applies to all believers, Jew and Gentile alike, whereas before, in the Old Testament, it did only apply to the Jewish people of the Old Covenant. Verse 9. No, not verse 9. We're still on verse 8. Yes, verse 8 still. They stumble being disobedient to the word, to which they also were appointed. It is appointed that those who are disobedient to the word should stumble over Jesus. That's part of that offensive attitude that I was talking about. Whether you actually understand that you're being disobedient or whether you're ignorant to it, you still stumble over Jesus. Does that make sense? There's two different, so there's the believer who now disobeys Jesus, and then there's the unbeliever who's never been taught Jesus. Both of them, Jesus is a stumbling block to. The one who knows and is disobedient, and then the one who is ignorant and is still disobedient, he's still a stumbling block. When Jesus spoke of himself as the stone in Psalm 118, this is what he was talking about. I got to get back to it. The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone for the corner. So if you refuse the cornerstone, then you can't have a building. Well, you can try, I guess, but it'll probably fall over. Now I know that you got to be careful with that. We build buildings all the time out of wood and whatnot, but just stay with me on this one. You have to have the cornerstone for the building to last, and Jesus is the cornerstone. Matthew 21:44. And whosoever falls on this stone will be broken. This is Jesus talking. And whosoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. So, now we have the unbeliever who falls on the stone. Well, you don't have to be an unbeliever either. What he's talking about is if you fall on the stone, you will be broken. You'll be born again. You'll change your ways. Off with the old, in with the new. We have to be broken when we come to Christ because we realize that we're nothing but sinners. And we realize that there's no other way for us to make it beyond this life, and it's only through Jesus. But if the stone falls on you, then it will grind you to powder, is what he's saying. So if you never come to Jesus and you die, this is the way I'm interpreting it, there is accountability and there's punishment. That's when the stone falls on you, and you will be ground to powder. I can't make it any clearer than that. I want to close with another story. Back when the Old West was being settled, pioneers flocked across the country to California and Oregon. In one particular spot on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, there was a large dirt-covered rock that stuck out of the wagon trail. And wagon wheels that drove over it were constantly broke, and men constantly tripped over it as they were walking. Finally, someone took the time to dig up the old stone, and they rolled it off the trail into the nearby stream. The stream was too wide to jump over, but people used this stone later on to cross the creek. It was used for years until finally one settler built his cabin near the stream, and he moved the odd stone because it was so pretty out of the stream and placed it in front of his cabin, and it served as a doorstep. So the cabin owner used it for years to get into his cabin. He stepped on it over and over again. As years passed, railroads were built and towns sprang up, and the old settler's grandson, he studied geology. On a visit to his grandfather's old cabin, his grandson happened to examine this giant lump of stone that was sitting in front of the fallen down cabin. It was discovered that this lump of rock happened to be the largest pure platinum nugget ever discovered on the eastern slope of the Rockies. It had been there for generations, and people never recognized its value. To some, it was just a stumbling stone that needed to be out of the way. To others, it was a stumbling stone, or a stepping stone. And to others, it was just a big, heavy rock. But to one person who understood what the stone really was, it had unlimited value. That's what Jesus is. We have to recognize that Jesus is precious to us. Even though we may find that things are just a stone, it's a precious stone. If you'll open, and if Ivan would lead out for us, in the Black Book's 482, we'll sing that song, and we'll leave that for the sermon.